Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.
Hello, welcome to the RTE GAA podcast. Mikey Stafford here. I'm joined by Rory O'Neill as always, and Kevin McStay and Eamonn Fitzmaurice, as we're about to look forward to the All-Ireland football semi-final, delayed between Kerry and Tyrone, with the winners obviously going on to play Dublin. Sorry, force of habit, going on to play Mayo. So we'll get on to that in a minute, but there's a little bit of breaking news as we record here on Thursday afternoon. Liam Cahill, Rory, has decided to stay with the Dacia for another year and turn down the overtures of his home county Tipperary, which will be surprising to some, probably outside the Dacia, but those inside probably think, look, we got to an All-Ireland final in his first year, and we probably we overachieved this year again, considering withdrawals and injuries and everything else. So he has a good little project going there, and you know, Tipperary is one of the biggest counties in Ireland geographically, and it's surrounded by other counties, so it's not going anywhere.
No, the only thing about the Tipperary job is, and this would be peculiar, I suppose, to a lot of counties where, you know, the prodigal son heads off and then he looks to come back and he gets offered the job. You do have to be careful, because I'm sure Eamonn would maybe have been in a similar scenario. Like, a lot of these guys will tell you, you may not get offered the job again. You know, like the next time that the job comes around, somebody else might come in for it, or somebody else might be considered the new guy on the block, and he might be the kind of more the fashionable figure to get in. But I think from his point of view, I think it was definitely, like, to my mind, it was an obvious decision, because like you have to, like, they had 2 years of COVID. So his first year was a straight knockout. His second year, he had the back door, wasn't it? There was a back door even in COVID, but still it was played out behind closed doors. And this year, obviously, it was a summer championship, but still a very sort of rushed sort of championship. Like next year, the round robin will be back. There'll be home championship matches in Walsh Park. He'll have Tig de Burka back at his disposal. He should have a proper league campaign to kind of launch himself into it. And I think Waterford are definitely going the right direction. Like, you have to remember, Waterford were knocked out of the 2 championships under his tenure by the team that won it, which is Limerick in the semi-final and Limerick in the final. So he's doing some great work, and I think it was a smart move on his part, certainly, to go and seek another 12 months and see if he can maybe push them over that final furlong, and hopefully the tip job then will come his way at some time in the future.
Yeah, Kevin, it's probably, it's not an unfamiliar situation for a GA manager to be in, I suppose, certainly in modern times when, you know, moving between counties is more accepted and more normal. But there has to be, like, he didn't rush out to dampen down these rumours. He clearly gave it a bit of thought, and there has to be a bit of a tug on the heartstrings. Your home county, a job you desperately wanted 2 years ago before Liam Sheedy came sweeping in, versus, a project. And obviously, while he is repeatedly described as not exactly being an arm around the shoulder manager, and one of the guys, he seems to be very much standoffish, very probably a bit like a principal in how he deals with the players. But there's a connection there, and he probably feels he's achieved something, but not his ultimate goal. So as a manager, a very driven manager, sometimes I suppose that desire to achieve a goal will, supersede even the desire to manage your home county.
Yeah, that's all very logical, Mikey. I think when you have a big county like Tip in hurling, obviously, and you're somebody like Liam Cahill looking in over the fence, I think what from a manager on the outside who might aspire one day to managing a Tipperary or whoever, I think it's all about your kind of your currency or your stock value. That what are you doing now? Is it going well for you as a project? Are you learning? Are you improving yourself as a coach, stroke manager? And I think the answer to all those questions, or those 2 or 3 questions I've just posed, is that Liam Cahill is doing that. I mean, they've only been defeated by the champions. in his 2 seasons. So his stock is certainly it's not in free fall, that's for sure. And so long as your currency has value, you will be approached for those type of jobs. You'll be always in the mix for them, and I think that's where Liam is coming from. I think it would have, if he had walked away from Waterford now, there might be a sense that, I won't say disloyalty, that'd be the wrong word, but maybe a sense that, he kind of left a ship that was in really good shape and had ambitions and aspirations for 2022 and the knockout in the full league that Rory explains. So I think it's a good move. One small asterisk, of course, is exactly what Rory said. I think it was Rory, or perhaps you, Mikey, said sometimes you don't get offered it the second time around.
You might not. Yeah.
So don't I know? This is what happens.
Yeah.
You might have all the work done, but somebody else has come in who also has good stock value. Whoever that might be, but there's always good managers in and around Tipperary, and there's always good hurlers. So people covet that job, if you like, because they know, a bit like down south in Eamonn's county, that if you're there long enough, if you get a 2, 3, 4 year term, you should strike gold in that period, because that's just the tradition of it.
On to Eamon's county. Eamon, you never have this kind of messing down in Kerry. Like, we all think there's succession planning, and then there's what Kerry do, which is, we all think you were probably pegged for the senior job about 2 years out. You were told you had it, and there was no surprises. And then the next man rolls in behind you, and then whoever's succeeding Peter Keane was probably told about a year ago, and you get all your business done nice and early. It's all very quiet and all very orderly. I'm right, yeah?
That sounds great, Mikey. Yeah. It's definitely not the way it happens. No, look, I think I agree with what the lads have said. I think they're both on the money. The only thing I'd say about it, and it was probably a position I was in myself, that when I was offered the job, I felt I was too young for the job. I was only 35 at the time. And I felt I would have been better off staying with the under 21s and improving myself and getting ready for the big job if it came down the line again. But when I thought about it, I said, look, you might not be offered it again, and you just have to take it. And that must have been something in Liam Cahill's mind. Absolutely, he has a loyalty to the Waterford players, and he's building something there. He must feel that they have a chance of winning the All-Ireland. Otherwise, he would have gone back to Tipperary, I imagine. But the only kind of caution I'd have for him is that you can move from genius to dunce very fast in the business he's in. And, the word is, as Kevin mentioned, your stock, Liam's stock is very high at the moment. But I well know that can change very fast, and it's all about its results. If he continues to build, and if he does win an All-Ireland in Waterford, I mean, it's an incredible achievement. But it's a big call for him, because when it comes around again, who knows, the next person that comes in Tipperary could be there for 10 years and win a couple of All-Ireland. So you just don't know. But he obviously believes big time in the Waterford lads, which is great endorsement of their abilities for next year.
Okay, that's enough hurling chat. This is supposed to be a football podcast. Best of luck to Liam Cahill in his endeavours next year. So later than advertised, 13 days later than advertised, we finally get Tyrone versus Kerry. And first off, and before, the COVID issue is we have to get to it, and we'll get to it very quickly, but just to shake things up a little bit. I saw yesterday a stat, I think it was the Mayo GA blog retweeted someone. It's quite astonishing, actually. Kerry's record in Croke Park is not great. Since 2017, when they beat Galway in All-Ireland quarter-final, this is Dara Walsh on Twitter, Kerry have played 10 times at Croke Park between league and championship. They've won just one of those games, with the sole victory coming against their opponents on Sunday, Tyrone, in the 2019 All-Ireland semi-final. Maybe, Kevin, you're keeping track of these things better than me, but I was actually quite astonished when I read that, because that's just not.
How many times would they have been playing Dublin? How many times would they have been playing Dublin in those 10 times? That's the only, maybe there's a small caveat that you need to stick an asterisk there. I'm just wondering. I don't know. It's a good stat now, but
Mayo in a league final, I think, would have been one name.
Two Mayo wins there at least, isn't there? All-Ireland semi-final as well.
Oh, the All-Ireland semi.
I can list them off if you want, lads. I'm responsible or partially responsible for some of them.
That's why I wasn't coming to you first, Eamonn, but fair play, you stuck your head in there.
Thanks, Mikey. Yeah, you just threw. That's a nice grenade to launch in at the start of it. 2017, we lost the All-Ireland semi-final replay to Mayo and Croke Park. 2018, we lost to Galway in the first game of the Super 8s. That's then where I ended that's my responsibility up to that point. Then 2019, drew with Donegal and Croke Park, beat Tyrone, drew with Dublin, lost to Dublin. 2020, didn't play in the championship, drew a league game, and we're up to 2021. Kerry actually haven't played a championship game in Croke Park since that Tyrone game, or since the Dublin replay 2 years ago. So
yeah, of course, yeah.
They'll be, I imagine, mad to get back up the road and to get playing there again.
I would imagine so. It's interesting stat though. Eamonn has he's explained it pretty well there, but it is funny that Kerry are always associated as one of these teams that kind of their championship starts when they get to Croke Park. Yeah, it seems to be that's where it's ending in recent times.
Yeah. Of course, the kind of outlier was the Munster Championship last year, where one and done. Obviously, there would be a great sense that Kerry would have recovered if there was a qualifier and made their way back to Croke Park one way or the other. I certainly, until you list it down, it's very stark when you see it that way. But it's only a stat. I wouldn't be making any big plans on that stat. I think the game this weekend has a lot more issues to consider and debate other than that stat, even though it is an interesting one.
Okay, here's a stat, Rory. It's been reported and it hasn't been denied. 17 players, isn't it, in Tyrone who were supposedly either had COVID or were close contacts. I think 17 had COVID is what's being reported.
Yeah.
So they returned to action this week, as in they returned to training. But gosh, we have a lot of examples. Emer Lamb, the rower, she was talking about it after the Olympics, how she returned to training in January and how she hadn't got a puff. Jack Byrne, former Shamrock Rovers player, Ireland international, now out in Cyprus, he had it and he said it just knocked him sideways. He couldn't do 10 minutes running. There's a lot of examples. Some of the Galway under-20 lads, I think, have their manager, at least, I think, is in the Independent today, describing just the impact it had on them. We're here to preview a game and big it up. It's live on our TV and radio, but part of me thinks it's very difficult to see how Tyrone are going to muster a shot here.
You don't really know. I mean, it's such an imprecise science, the whole thing behind it. The knowledge that we have around it, the amount of facts that we've been furnished with is all still very sketchy. I think, look, you'd have a certain amount of sympathy for him, but you'd probably have more sympathy for Kerry, let's be perfectly honest. I mean, if you're going to go back on the timeline of all of this, and I saw Kieran Murphy making a really good...
that was brilliant. I saw that angle.
Yeah, and I think it's a very fair point that he does make in that, why didn't they go down the road of ensuring vaccination? A lot of other counties have boxed that off quite early, and would that have guaranteed that none of this would have happened in the first place? No. But at the same time, if you do also look at the timeline of events, the Ulster final was on the 31st of July. From what we can gather, it was in the days that followed that this started to become a really serious problem. So you're talking early August, maybe August 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th. Now, the semi-final is finally being played on the 28th of August, which is, just nearly a month after maybe the first signs of this problem had first surfaced. The point I would make, and the point that I made a couple of weeks ago when you and I and Kevin were actually on this, is that the decisions around this needed to be made a little bit more quickly. I do appreciate that this was unheralded territory, it was uncharted waters, and that they were into an unprecedented situation, so that they had to kind of maybe take it a small bit more step by step. But if they knew, if the governing body And Tyrone County Board and even Kerry County Board were aware that the problem was going to venture on as far as and as long as it has done. Then the decision probably, in my mind, should have been made a lot faster. And like, it might have actually afforded Kerry, for instance, now I don't know if Eamonn would agree on this, but it might have even afforded Kerry the opportunity to turn around to the lads and say, look, do you know what? We'll release everybody back to their clubs. We'll run off one round a club and then we'll bring everybody back in with a 2-week run in again. Now, maybe you can't do that because of bubbles and because of all the other types of problems around that. And then you're releasing lads out and then the lads are bringing the hoop. But I don't know. I just felt that there was probably big lessons for everybody to learn along the way. Nobody is blameless here, to be fair, except for Kerry, who I would probably have a lot of sympathy for. And I'd have a strong suspicion we're going to see the reaction that they will give probably on the field on Saturday at 3:30.
Yeah. Can I make, Mikey? Can I just tease out the Rory's initial comment on the Kieran Murphy piece? I think it's in today's Times or yesterday's. When I'm online, I get days mixed up. But essentially, as I understood the piece, they did a risk assessment that said we won't vaccinate because of the 2 weeks downturn in form, which might have affected their league run, which was very tight, as we all know. So that was the risk they took versus not being vaccinated later on in the championship campaign, and the risk you took with that. So I would certainly in the postseason review be looking at my risk assessment officer. He'd be on dodgy ground for a reappointment because
he may have already assessed that himself, Kev.
Yeah.
And I would say that was not a clever call. When you look at the likes of the Limericks and the Corks again, who as a group got double vaccinated very early in this process, and then they had to live with the consequences of that decision. So this is the first time now in the history of the GAA that the league was put before the championship by a manager. But there you go. This is the key question. I think we'll talk football and no doubt tactics and selections, but I think we could almost park that, Mikey. I think the question here is the ability to play an All-Ireland semi-final at full tilt, to bring your A game to Croke Park, as I think Niall Sludden mentioned in a press piece. You're talking about the elite sports persons there, rowers and rugby players and so on. I remember my own family, two of my own children, who got COVID, and they're not elite athletes, can I add? But they struggled for a couple of weeks after they came out of their 14-day period or whatever. They were still, tired and lethargic, and what we know associated with it. Not long COVID, I'm not saying that, but into the 3-4 week department. And now you have elite athletes who are tuned to an ounce of their lives trying to manage COVID. And it's an unknown, but it's not a fully unknown, but the little bit we know about it, because we don't have any corporate memory on COVID just yet. We've no evidence, no long studies. The little bit we know is that it's highly likely. Did you say 17? I think it is. Or 21.
It's 17.
17. Yeah. Well, if 3 or 4 of those.
One was hospitalized, we know as well.
Yeah, I mean, and everything I say now, I'm saying, of course, I have sympathy and empathy with their situation. But the upshot of it is that they're coming to Croke Park next Saturday, and it has to be a shot in the dark for them. They do not know. They couldn't know possibly where they are and how they're going to perform if they're not having full sessions. And that, again, I understand is the case.
Yeah, that's it. Can you know, though, Eamonn, in so much as like Niall Sludden says in that article on the RT website, that a lot of the boys coming back just gradually being eased in, and we're being gradually eased in. I'm sure you have examples from your own time where you had a player who was struck down by flu, sounds dramatic, by a cold or an ear infection or something, and you ease him back into training. And you've probably done, maybe you haven't, but maybe you take a chance. You say, okay, we'll start him. How often does that work out, and how often do you see like he's blowing with 25 minutes gone, and you have to hook him at half time or before? And like, we're obviously speculating here. Some of these lads probably got a runny nose and that was the end of it, or maybe not even a runny nose. But if even 3 or 4 of them like are suffering from the symptoms Kevin's kind of suggested there, it's a hell of a gamble, isn't it? Because all managers know what it's like to risk a player who's hasn't trained properly and was physically incapacitated in some way in the run up to a game.
Yeah, no, look, I'd say 2 things in it, Mikey. I'd say number 1, and I'm sure Kevin would agree, it's almost as sure as a scientific formula, or one of those algebra folders behind Kevin there that has sent a shiver down my spine when I saw it. It's nearly, I was never too hot at the maths, Kevin, but it's nearly as sure as a scientific formula that if a player misses a couple of sessions even, it tells in their performance levels. You know, they need the time. Like I won't say it was a hard and fast rule, but you know, it would take something special for a player to be started in a game for us the following weekend if he hadn't partaken in the AVB week out. It rarely, if ever, happened in Championship. Odd exception here and there, I'm sure, but more often than not, we didn't, because once a player missed a couple of sessions at all, it told in them when they came back, and it took them the couple of sessions to regain their form. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it then, and again, it's something I would have always believed in myself as a player, and again, when involved in the management, is that regardless of what has happened beforehand, when you cross the white lines, all bets are off. So I'm sure that's the way the Tyrone camp will be looking at it, that if you're putting your hand up and you're available for selection, once you cross the white lines, then there's no excuses. There can't be, whether you've had a great night's sleep or you've had a bad night's sleep, or your food has been great or your food has been off, or you've been ill or you haven't. Once you go out, you have to perform. And that's the environment they're in. It's an unforgiving environment, and that's the way it probably has to be. So I'm sure that's the way Tyrone are approaching it this week. Of course, publicly, they're painting the picture that they haven't been able to do very much, but I'm sure whatever 20 players take to the pitch and see action on Saturday evening, they'll be good to go, and I'll be shocked if any of them aren't, you know, close to full throttle.
Yeah. Okay. Now I won't pretend that's COVID discussion done with here, because when we're talking about team selections and everything else, it might pop up again. So there's no ban on discussing COVID or this situation. But as you said, we should probably get on and talk tactics a little bit. Rory, it's you can't get away from the fact that last time these two teams played, Kerry put up 6-16 to Tyrone's 1-13 in a league match, and the narrative hasn't changed much for Kerry. Everybody thinks this Kerry team are an attacking just force of nature, but Tyrone, obviously that was a nadir for them, and they have improved a lot. So we can certainly use that as a reference point for team selection, and we can see how both teams have probably strengthened since then in various positions. But let's not kid ourselves that Tyrone have learned a lot since that game in June.
And they've come through a pretty tough Ulster Championship, you'd have to say. I mean, they've beaten in Cavan, Donegal and Monaghan. You know, they've beaten, we would say, you know, the pick of Ulster football there, really. Possibly the last number of champions. Cavan certainly were champions last year. I think Donegal were champions maybe the year before that. And Monaghan maybe a couple of years before that. So, you know, you would have to say they've been battle hardened. I think they have a lot going for them. The league meeting, in fairness to Peter Keane, I know Peter, he draws a certain level of derision sometimes with some of the Yera speak that he's accused of. But I actually do believe on the league game from earlier that he does. I'd take him at face value in that. I would read nothing into it. Absolutely nothing whatsoever. Means zero. I'd probably take my cues more from Kerry this year, from the way they played against Dublin, particularly in the league, when they were 7 or 8 points down and really put Dublin to the sword the first 15 minutes after half time. But more particularly 2 years ago when they beat Tyrone, and they were facing the edge of a cliff on that semi-final as well. They were losing at halftime, I think 9-5. They were certainly 9 or 10. They were 5 or 6 points down at halftime, and they came out in that second half and really went after Tyrone. And has there been a huge personnel shift since then? Obviously, we've changed of management in Tyrone. Kerry's still with the same management, but I think one big player from a Kerry perspective, and I've really been enthused about this guy really since I saw him playing for East Kerry in the club championship about a year and a half, 2 years ago when we first started doing club, is Paudie, David's brother. I couldn't understand for the life of me why he wasn't in with Kerry before then. I just think this fella brings something that I would say if I was the opposition, he'd drive me bananas, because he can kind of do everything. He can kick scores, he can get in your face, he's good to win turnovers, he's all action. Does he have a discipline issue? Apparently that was something that was in his game. Eamonn might know more about that, but I'm sure, look, if he's playing inter-county now, that'll have to be eradicated, because discipline, as we know, is going to be key. But that's the game that I'd probably look for more as a sign and more of a marker in the road to see where these two teams pair off against each other. And I think Kerry have improved significantly in that time. I'm not so sure if Tyrone have.
Okay. I was going to start with Tyrone more so, but why not? You've opened an interesting question there. Eamonn, why didn't you pick Clifford Elder a few years ago?
Believe it or not, he wasn't ready at the time, Mikey. Yeah. He's a very talented sports person, plays soccer, he's very low handicap golfer. He's just one of these guys, and
he's one of those gits.
Yeah. One of those gits that we all hate.
I certainly don't have to worry about those kind of problems, but he focused on his football, and I think two things that happened simultaneously for him that were huge in his development and pushing him on. He'd been tipping around with the Kerry juniors, playing a bit with his club Fossa, playing a bit with East Kerry, but East Kerry started to get stronger and go on the run. He began to take his football more seriously. And then the other thing was he won a Sigerson with UCC.
Yeah.
And I think that was a huge point for Paudie. And, he put himself in the shop window on the county championship in Kerry, which is what we often talk about. He wasn't obviously on the squad in 2019. He was involved last year, was peripheral, came on late in the game below in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, got a couple of runs in the league, but came back, a different man physically this year as well. I think the lockdowns have probably suited him and other Kerry players from the point of view that there's always a huge amount of club football in Kerry as well as the county scene. And in terms of actually physically developing, it can be challenging for fellas to have the time to develop like that. So he's in great nick. And I think above all else, he's just in a great place in his personal life and mentally to really drive it on. And Rory's right. He's been incredible this year, and he's given Kerry something completely different that has been missing.
Correct, yeah.
That has been missing. And probably as well as everything he's bringing with and without the ball himself, he's freed up Shawnee Shea a bit as well to play a bit closer to goal and to become even a bigger scoring threat as well, which has been a fantastic knock-on effect. So it is exciting for Kerry, but it's from now on the tests come, and this is where Paudie's going to find out himself what it's like at the top level. He's not going to get the freedom of Croke Park on Saturday evening like he did in Fitzgerald Stadium for the Munster final. And he has the ability and he's the temperament in the football to deal with that. But this is going to be his first real test like that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how he deals with that.
Yeah, it's got a lovely balance, Kevin, hasn't it? I suppose people might have seen the Kerry forward line. They might have seen Paudie Clifford might be kind of in a... This is in no way an insult. It's just a offhand description, like kind of the water carrier role, or kind of the worker bee, like Stephen O'Brien, and maybe to an extent Jack Barry, like a lot of tracking, a lot of up and down the field. But he's almost got more the kind of creative role that we associated with Sean O'Shea last year, which is kind of freeing up O'Shea to do more scoring, and then Geaney and Clifford can be Geaney and Clifford, and they just. If you were to pick kind of a blend of six forwards for an inter-county forward line, that's kind of almost a 60 land on. And it's interesting that perhaps to those of us not so familiar with Paudie Clifford, we might have seen him in the role he's actually developed into this year.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think the Sigerson medal, Sigerson victory is the key. I think it's a huge moment in a young player's career, because it kind of, my memory of playing Sigerson was, it proves to you I'm good enough to go on to another level. Physically, I'm able to cope with what's going on around the place, because Sigerson, well, certainly back in my time, was hot and heavy. And if you get through that and establish yourself, you're probably going to be well able to play provincial intercounty. But Eamonn's point is very well made. The big test is coming. He's going to have a Tyrone cornerback now wired into him for 74, 5, 6, 7 minutes. And the different pressures that a Tyrone cornerback can bring to bear in Croke Park. And he has to deal with all that, and then live now with the new expectation that's on Paudie Clifford's shoulders, that there's an expectation in Kerry that he'll score, that he'll assist, that he'll work hard, etc. And I think one other factor in his development is probably the success of his brother, who was, came on. It's always nice to have a brother around the scene. Certainly a brother that's just a superstar near the day he walks out. So there's a great comfort blanket there for him, if you like. And that might have also been part of stepping it up and leaving whatever little creases were in his game, getting them ironed out. And that often happens. I mean, that often happens. A player, just as Eamonn said, is just physically, temperamentally, concentration-wise, just isn't ready to play at that level. So Saturday will be a great test. It's a lovely balanced forward line. I think there's a little bit of balancing still to be done, Mikey. In my view, when I keep going back over the team, I with the current Kerry team, from midfield up, very decent. Obviously, I'm not going to go back shouting about the defence, because I want to talk about midfield balance, where you have David Moran playing midfield. I was at his 2006 minor final in Ennis against Roscommon. That's a long time ago now. That's 15 years ago. So he's up 33, 34, and he's Kerry's top midfielder. Who's his partner? Jack Barry, Jeremy O'Connor. That has yet to be seen. And I think it probably will be Jack Barry, with O'Connor maybe going wing to help out midfield generally. That might be the balance to go for. And then they have, that marvellous player, Stephen O'Brien. I think, I've come across him now against him and watched him when we were involved in Roscommon. He's just such a busy footballer. He's a great contributor to what Kerry want to do. And then in the middle, for me, is the key man. I know Paudie is there and David Clifford is there and Paul Ganey, but Sean O'Shea, to me, is the man. He's the right-footed version of Declan O'Sullivan. And I can't say much more about him. He's outstanding, just outstanding. And he's proven in Croke Park. He has done the business in Croke Park already. Even though he's a young man, he's been up there before and he performed. And of course, he brings to Kerry many, many things, but one thing in particular that Tyrone cannot provide. He's an elite free taker. Whereas Tyrone have issues around that. Still have. Hard to believe it after all these years. They have goalkeepers wandering into free takers positions. They might have a different kit out free taker today. Kerry have
always had that, haven't they, Kevin? It's a great asset. Like, I mean,
Morris
Brian Sheehan, Morris, you name it, Gooch, the whole lot. They always have top class free takers.
And range, Rory, range.
Yeah, 50 meters, not a bother.
And a lot of it off the floor, which is preference under pressure, obviously. So, and all the other things O'Shea brings to it. So I'm obviously really looking forward to seeing him play on Saturday as well. But they have a beautifully balanced forward line if it clicks, and they will be tested obviously on Saturday. But it's behind that, just what that midfield is going to contribute will be very, very interesting. I know with my Mayo hat on me, we'll be looking very carefully to see what sort of engines, what sort of work rate, box to box, what can these lads cover. As I said, David now is well into his 30s. Jack Barry wouldn't be an incredibly athletic player, but I think the big game changer for Kerry would be if they got Jeremy O'Connor up and playing to the level I think a lot of Kerry people think he can get to. That'd be interesting to see.
Rory, so on midfield then, like we're talking about Dave Moran is probably like one of the top midfielders of the last 15 years as Kevin has outlined there, playing alongside, Barry or O'Connor, kind of lauded as well. It's not an insult to say Brian Kennedy and Kilpatrick are slightly, there's less known about them, but they have battled their way through the through the Ulster Championship thus far. So, they've earned some stripes at this stage, haven't they, in the Tyrone midfield?
100%. But I do, and again, I think Kevin and Eamonn would probably be better than me to adjudicate on this. But I would be of the strong view that their midfield and their whole platform and their game is probably enhanced and helped immeasurably by Tyrone having the edge in one particular area. I definitely think Tyrone have the edge in goal.
Yeah.
They have the better goalkeeper, not just better than Kerry. Look, he's a better goalkeeper than loads of goalkeepers out there, So I think that's the one area where Tyrone will have an advantage, and he
can now kick Rory to
he's laser.
Two very big midfielders, even though they are novices, perhaps.
Yeah, and he's laser like in his kickouts. He can
kick it 80 yards comfortably.
Very, very similar to Cluxton. Doesn't need a big run up to get massive trajectory on it. He can fire it off 50 meters, standing back 2 steps, and boom. So I think he's going to be a key part of Tyrone's launch pad to try and get their hands on primary ball and to see exactly. And then from a Kerry perspective, it is going to be really interesting to see what they do, whether or not they push up and force him to go along and gamble, whether or not that ball is going to, gamble on a midfield battle. And so I think from that point of view, that's going to be really interesting, because I do think, and then I think we did see as well the last time, this sweeper keeper thing. What do we think of that? I mean, is that a bit of a gimmick? He's popping into space. What do you think, Eamonn? Where he's popped?
No, I don't think it is, Rory.
Okay.
I agree with I think he is going to be central, and I have been impressed with the two boys, Brian Kennedy and Con Kilpatrick. They remind me a bit of Anthony Maher and David Moran together for us maybe 7-8 years ago, where they were big, strong athletes, and they gave us a great presence in the middle of the field for a particular type of a kick out. But Morgan, the two things I'd say is that, number one, his kick out, especially the big long 80-yarder that you mentioned there, Mikey, that can take out the Kerry press, and Kerry are going to have to adjust a bit for that. And when they adjust a bit for it, then it opens up the little pockets that he's good at picking out, particularly in Croke Park. So that's going to be very interesting, because Kerry's press has been very effective so far this year, and him picking holes in that. Now, they cracked him in Killarney today in Killarney, but I wouldn't read anything into it. But the sweeper keeper thing, Rory, I think is very effective, and I was surprised with some of the commentary afterwards, to be honest, that it's mad stuff and it's bananas and everything else. I was at the Ulster final in Croke Park, and he completely spooked Rory Beggan in the first half, who, in our experience of coming up against Rory Beggan, he was one of the best kickers that you'd come across, again, because he had the range. He could go over the top when we pressed up on him. But that pocket that he loved using, the 12 pocket for him, and that he used brilliantly against Armagh when they were under pressure in that game, in the high-scoring Ulster Championship game, Morgan just took it away. He just took it away from him.
It's incredibly low risk. It's 1,000,000 to 1 shot that he, all the spectators, he'll get caught for.
But did he not get caught though down in Killarney? Did was it Gavin White kick the ball into the empty net, or was it Gavin one of the?
No, I wouldn't. No,
that was on one of his own kickouts, so
right.
Like on the opposition kickout. No, I agree with Kevin. There's no risk at all there, and what it spooked Rory Beggan, number one. But who it also spooked was all of the Monaghan players that were getting ready to run into the pocket. They were looking for the pocket that they know is always there. The next thing, the goalie was there. They weren't running, making the run. The kick out wasn't on. Beggan was getting frustrated. I thought it was excellent. I remember the last year I was in charge, Shane Ryan wasn't available till that year. He was playing outfield with his club and he didn't want to play in goals, but Shane Murphy from Crokes was in goals with Brian Kelly for us that year. And we were trying to get the lads to play out quite aggressively as a sweeper keeper, but it was still a work in progress really by the time I finished up. But yeah, I think it's the way the game is going. And I think the amount of joy that you get out of it, if you can see the odd goal, it's worth it. once you're sensible. Rory Beggan probably went a small bit too far maybe by the end of the game when it became a bit mad, but I think if used effectively, it's hugely effective. And like Kevin said, it is very low risk, really.
And also to throw into the argument, into the debate, Morgan is very accomplished out the field, and he's very confident about his own ability. He plays outfield for, is it Eden Dork? Got me. Yeah, it is. Yeah, Eden Dork.
It is Eden
And
Dork,
you know, he's very comfortable there. So that even reduces the risk from his perspective. And the whole thing is, how confident are you to, as what you're saying, Eamonn, aggressively go after the position, go after the ball? He'd do that. You know, he's very confident about his own abilities, and that's a big positive for him when you find yourself out in areas that you wouldn't normally occupy.
Interestingly,
and someone else can go into goals as well, lads. Someone else, sorry, Mikey. So, like,
of course,
in that Ulster final again, the
last
time
man back.
Yeah, Peter Hart went into goals for the time that he pressed right up onto the 20-yard line. Now, that was kind of mad that time because a sub came on. The sub was clever enough to go looking for the sharp kick out because he hadn't been picked up, and Morgan just followed him. But Peter Hart just stood into goals, and unless a lot of the time you're not going to get a shot in the goal, it's just to be there and to have the presence to mind the net. So, if
you recall, also, and I'll just give the final tale on it, perhaps some years ago, I think it maybe 2-3. Dublin, when Dublin went into black card territory, Cluxton went into right corner on the opposition kick out to allow the corner to push up one, and they all toggled up one to cut out the deficit of being down a man. You know,
that was the All-Ireland 2019, Kevin. That was
okay.
That was right at the end of the drawn game in 2019. At one stage, Cluxton ended up effectively marking Paul Gainey because, again, they needed to push out to get back the ball, and it worked. And they got their draw when they were a man down because of Johnny Cooper being sent off and won the replay well, obviously. So yeah, and there are times where you just have to go after it, and the goalkeeper is an extra man. Both goalkeepers next play outfield for their clubs, so we might have a bit of crack and entertainment around the goalies again.
We have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I was about to say that he plays full forward for Rathmore, and I know that Kieran Donaghy actually was bigging him up, saying now that he's fit and he's firing and committed to the cause, Eamon, that it might be, it would be no harm to consider using him in a more expansive role. And when your opposition are almost certainly going to do it, if you have a goalkeeper who's comfortable with the ball in hand or comfortable, in space, without a net behind them, the onus is almost on you to use them because otherwise you're effectively down a man at key points of the game.
Yeah, big time. And I think it'll evolve more. But I'll be interested to see, and it happened again in the Ulster final, is that if a goalie is out in a pocket, especially if he's out a bit, what happens when you put the kick out on top of him? I'd be telling our lad, put it out on top of him and let's see what he does then. Is he actually going to contest it? Or
Morgan probably would.
Is he going to start sprinting back? So it might be worth testing him out once or twice.
Yeah. Rory, we've mentioned the Kerry forward line, which is obviously much lauded, but the Tyrone forward line, thanks to a couple of notable returns from injury, it's not looking too shabby now at all when you consider the Ulster final, the starting six is O'Neill, McKenna, Myler, McCurry, Donnelly and Bradley, and you have certain Mr. McShane sitting on the sideline. It's there's options there now.
And Derek Canavan,
of course.
So I like the two of those would be automatic first choices, which means they would, like, if they were fit and healthy, I would assume they would go straight into that starting sextet. And then you're looking at those two lads dropping out of that sextet to bolster your bench. Like Tyrone aren't going into Sunday's match with lacking firepower up front. I wouldn't necessarily see that being their biggest problem. I think their biggest issue, ultimately, for me anyway, is it's just I'm just not sure, and I'm just
other than COVID.
I'm not sure if anybody. I mean, look, we were there in Killarney, and we've seen Kerry now a few times this year. Obviously, the acid test is really coming, and look, the tests that they've gotten heretofore have not been of requisite quality. They've been very, very poor. Let's be perfectly honest on that front. There's no point in saying otherwise, right? So. But still, the movement up front, and they're playing it in the best possible style of Kerry football. They have forwards there that are just going to pull you all over the shop. You'll be, and that would be my biggest concern from Tyrone's perspective is that up front, I wouldn't be like, they'll probably have to drop a couple back. They might have to drop at least one sweeper. There's no way they'll be able to go man to man with that Kerry forward line, because if they do, they're going to be in massive trouble. And then that obviously takes away a little bit of potency that they have at the other end. And then you have to ask yourself the question then, if you start to go with your +1s or your +2s, are you going to rack up a big enough score at the other end to compete with? Because you can be sure as night follows day, Kerry are going to score. They're going to score 117, 118, 216, 217. That's what you're going to need to win this game. And I can't see Tyrone getting within an ass's roar of that, to be honest.
To counter that, then, Kev, if you were the Kerry manager, looking at those potential Tyrone forwards, and let's say McShane and Canavan. Well, McShane more likely than Canavan, I believe, are coming in there. Kerry, we know, aren't blessed with man markers. What are your matchups there? If you're looking at if you're Peter Keane and you're trying to, prevent Tyrone racking up that score that could trouble you.
Well, I don't think that is Tyrone's strongest suit, getting big scores. I think their game is all about other stuff.
They've only scored one goal in the championship, Kev. One goal.
And that would, without looking at the exact numbers, Rory, that would be the sense I'd have of them. They're the sum of their parts. Let me put it that way. And maybe just to throw a little, and I'll come back to your question, Mickey. I'm not avoiding it. If you look at the four lads that cried off the morning of the Ulster final down in Dublin, and one of them has escaped me, but I know I just have my program notes here in front of me. Tiernan McCann, Richie Donnelly, and Frank Burns were three of them. Now that was
Rory Brennan.
Yes, well done. Rory Brennan is the fourth. Now, Eamonn, you bringing them four back in, that's a tasty subs bench now straight away. Yeah. If that's where you want to place them. That is a very tasty subs bench straight away. You can only use 5, and there's 4 top ones immediately. By the way, just talking about subs, I thought I'm going off the tangent again. In the Munster final, lads, when I was reviewing the tape, Kerry have brought it to an all-time high now. They used 9 substitutes in the Munster final. They had 2 blood injuries, but again, in the post-season assessment, they're going to have a strong look at their doctor, because his stitching speed has dropped dramatically. The Tommy Walsh needed 12 minutes to get tidied up or find a new jersey or get the blood off him somewhere or other. But it must have been a great rest he had anyway. But 9 was a new record now since records started being kept for these things. But go back to Tyrone. They're going to be there, as they were the first casualties, we'll say, of COVID. The expectation is that they will be in fear, fettle, and that's their 4 tasty players to be thrown into the action. I think Kerry will have to respect what Tyrone are going to bring on Saturday in terms of their own setup, and it might be a little cautious to begin with. I think it might be. I think I'd be a little cautious just to get a feel for it, because Kerry haven't played for, I have it down for 5 weeks. Is that right?
5 weeks, yeah.
5 weeks. So, you're feeling your way around now the first quarter, perhaps. And you can't walk away from the fact that while Monaghan was a tight game in the Ulster final, Tyrone led at the first water break, led at half-time, led at the third water break, and won the game. They led start to finish. So they're quite accomplished, and as Rory mentioned, they've beaten all the champions of the previous 5, 6, 7 years up in Ulster to get here. They've had a tougher road than Kerry, put it that way. Now, matchups. I don't think they'll go too harebrained about matchups on this occasion, because again, Tyrone don't have a Seanie O'Shea or a David Clifford. And my sense is, in the great tradition of that county, they'll put their best foot forward in their best positions that suit them. I wouldn't see too many major matchups. Like if you look at McGeary and on the other side, Myler. Okay, so they're kind of, as Sean Kavanagh calls them, transition link players. So won't that be perfectly suited for Gavin White stroke Paul Murphy? No big deal at all in that type of a matchup. So I see the Kerry defence very much manning their selection positions, and seeing what Tyrone have to throw at them. And I would see a cagey enough opening quarter, because just the length of time that has been since the last competitive action. I don't think it lends itself to anything, even though I know Kerry will want to, have a blistering pace and all that. I don't think it lends itself to that. I think there'll be a bit of feeling out.
Okay. Okay, lads. I think we'll get on to predictions. And before we get on to this, I just want to note that on our last football podcast, only one member of the podcast predicted a Mayo win. And
one did predict extra time. I did say extra time.
Yes,
who,
I did.
Who was that, Mikey?
That was me.
Well done.
Yeah, and I also said that they would do it by mimicking Wexford's manic aggression in their Leinster first round match.
Yeah.
Did you have a punt on it? You see, there's a great story told about the late and great Paudie Shea. He'd bump into Mayo lads in the Burlington in the early part of the year, and there was one friend of mine in particular. When he bumped into him, had a very quick answer from him. He said, I have a great feeling about Mayo this year. God, there's something in them. I liked what I saw in the league and so on. And I think this could be the year. And your man would always say, show me your bet slip. So it was a good call. Fair play to you.
Yeah. No, I'm not a betting man. And no, just being able to lord it over great football men like you is all the reward I want. So I'll get things going here by saying that I think Kerry are going to win. I know it's a big call, lads, but I just have a feeling in my waters. Eamonn, do you agree with me?
This week?
No, look, I'm very wary of Tyrone, and I think the players and management will be approaching it that way, Mikey. They'll be very much COVID talk, and anything else will be put very much they're going to expect to be playing against Tyrone at full tilt. I think it'll be tighter than people think it will, but I do think Kerry will win. I'm a bit worried about the lack of contest so far, but there's an awful lot of the Kerry lads are playing well. As individuals, they're playing well, and I think that they can up their game for whatever comes at them on Saturday. They will be ready for it. I'm hopeful they'll win. I think it'll be a bit tighter maybe than some people think.
Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm with Eamonn on that as well. I see a Kerry victory, maybe 4 or 5 points, 6 points, that type of a game. I see it being a bit cagier than perhaps others. I think it's going to be a fair bit of fighting, competitive fighting involved. As in, it could be the third quarter. I was looking at the tape for Kerry against Cork, and they got 3 goals, bang, 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 in I think it was an 8 or 9 minute period, and that zipped up the body bag fairly easily. And it will be probably quarter 3 before we see the full powers and might of the Kerry team. But obviously, with the Mayo interest in the final, we'll be glued to the TV to see what Kerry are going to produce. And indeed, I think Tyrone will, for every ounce in them, above all games, they will want to raise a major gallop in this one. That's a given, fellas. That's the nature of the rivalry, and whether they're miles off the pace or not, they will give it their last ounce. Now, I don't think it's going to be enough, and I think COVID is a major part. If COVID wasn't in this storyline, I think we'd be in for a massive contest on Saturday. Yeah. But no, Kerry 4 or 5 points, something like that.
Okay, in the third quarter. Rory, as a Cork man, you'll just be looking forward to a game that's competitive at half-time, yeah?
Yeah. At this stage, Jesus, yeah, we'd be glad of that. But I think we could, and you know what? I'm going to go against the grain. I think that we might not get that either this Saturday, and I'm not just saying that. I can understand there is a little bit of historical voodoo there with Tyrone in relation to Kerry, obviously going back to the noughties and everything that happened then. I think, in fairness to Tyrone, certainly under Hart in that era, I think that probably still pertains. Kerry would kind of carry a kind of a mystical quality in a Gaelic football sense for most Ulster counties, but particularly for Tyrone. And I definitely think if they're going to raise their game and accept the challenge of taking on Kerry, there's no one better. But I think to my mind, Kerry will win this pulling up, and it'll be the two unbeaten teams rightly in this year's All-Ireland final.
Okay.
Unbeaten teams of 2021, that is. Yeah, I think, am I right in that? Mayo and Kerry have not lost a game.
I think Kerry have had a draw, obviously.
Yeah.
Mayo have had,
I think Kerry will win comfortably, but you know, I'm not saying that. that's just a genuine thought. Anyway. I'm trying to say it to upset Kerry at all, Eamonn, anyway.
It's all right, Rory. What does the guru in Wexford think?
I've already predicted a Kerry win as well. So
Kerry win, sorry.
So no, this is the error-free zone here. No, there's no mind games from Rory. Okay, folks, thanks very much. Just a reminder, of course, the game on Saturday is live on RTE Television, the RTE Player, and on RTE Radio, and live blog and report and reaction and everything else on the RTE website and the RTE News app. So thank you to Rory, thank you to Kevin, thank you to Eamonn, and I hope everybody has a lovely weekend and enjoys the match. Thanks very much.
Okay, lads. See you,
Cheers,
Eamonn.
guys.
See you, lads.
See you, fellas.
How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last two matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.